Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the January My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I have quite a few videos that I recorded but did not have the opportunity to voice over because I'm always in the process of making new layouts, and a couple of the videos get left behind every now and then. So I am trying to rectify that and get these videos voiced over and up on my channel. For this layout, I started off with one of the 49 and Market pattern papers. I'm covering it with some clear gesso. The brand is Finnabair. Once the gesso is dry, I begin to add some Distress Oxide to the background. I'm using the packaging technique and two colors of Distress Oxide. I'm using Stormy Sky and Speckled Egg. They're both shades of blue, and since this kit had lots of blue in it, I thought that these would be good colors to put in the background. After I had applied a lot of the color using the packaging technique, I added a lot more water to the plastic, and I used a paintbrush to spread lots of splatters all around that area of color that I created on the background. I applied the color in kind of a half circle because I knew that my embellishments would go in the center. After adding quite a few splatters, I decided that I wanted to add a little more color, especially up on the top part of the background. It looked like it had a lot less than some of the other parts of the layout. And then I added another layer of color going all the way around. That just helps to build up the layers of color and make the color look a little bit deeper. I use my sprayer to water down the Distress Oxides a little bit. This helps the color to spread around the page. And because I have applied the clear gesso to the background, I can spray the water right onto the layout and it will move the color around. If I didn't have the gesso on the background, then whatever I put on the background would be absorbed by the paper, and I wouldn't be able to change it too much by adding water, maybe a little bit. Now I'm adding some watered down white acrylic paint all around the area where I added the Distress Oxides. Now I'm beginning to work on the embellishments I'm going to put on the page. I'm using this large house-shaped die cut and a piece of the packaging from the kit. The packaging had an off-white background with some brown writing on it, and I thought that that would be a subtle background for this large embellishment. I'm also going to use a number of layering pieces. I first inked all of the edges with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I knew that I wanted to have the photo to the right of that large house die cut. Now I'm layering those cards together, fitting the pieces, and just kind of figuring out what I like the look of. I like to try things out and then rearrange them. I think that layering is definitely a trial and error process. There were several large cards that you see that I have layered on top of each other. There were also a number of cards that had a notebook edge. I really love those edges, so I often will cut the edges off of the card and then tuck them into different places in the cluster. I have one going horizontally across the top and vertically along the left-hand side of those larger cards. I place a tab on the right-hand side of the cluster, and now I'm going back in with some smaller ephemera bits to make the cluster look a little bit more interesting. I added a ticket. Now I'm going to piece the pattern paper that I was working on earlier together with a piece of dark blue pattern paper that's going to go along the left-hand side of the layout. And I like to use some of my old papers that I know that I won't be using for their patterns as bases to mount papers when I piece them together like this. Once I had both background papers attached down, I layered my cluster back on top of the background. I'm going to use one of the rub-ons that we got in the January kit in the upper right-hand corner as part of the title. And then I'm using some of the beautiful 49 and Market flowers that we got in the kit. I'm putting some in the upper left-hand corner of the cluster, some in the lower right-hand corner, and then I'm going to add a very small cluster near the title, but that's going to look a little different than the other ones because there are going to be more flowers in those two other clusters. As a border between the two pattern papers, I wanted to put this laser cut piece of lace. I don't know why, but I didn't like the way the whole piece of lace looked when I did it, although I really like the way it looks right now. That happens to me all the time when I voice over videos. I'll change something and then I'll think, oh, that looked not too bad the way that I had it. I do end up leaving it there, but I end up tucking some of the die cut underneath the pattern paper. The outline of the house embellishment and the blue pattern paper on the left-hand side of the layout were a little bit too close for me, and I thought that it made it a little bit hard to see the house embellishment. To create some contrast between those two areas, I added a lighter colored border all around the outside of the house embellishment. I had to piece it together a little bit on the bottom, but I think that really helps to make the house embellishment stand out from the background. Now I'm placing down that lace border and I'm adding some adhesive to the back of that whole large cluster and attaching it down to the layout. I used a large EK Success scalloped punch that I had in my stash. I punched out a strip from one of the embellishments. I inked the edges with some Distress ink, and now I'm going to rub on the word U in the upper right-hand corner. Before applying the rub-on, I double-checked to make sure that the word was placed straight on the layout, and then I used the tool that was included in the rub-on pack, and I applied the rub-on. They're very easy to apply. I also added another phrase underneath the word you. So now the title reads, "You Make Today Magic." I like the way there were a whole bunch of titles and smaller sentiments mixed together on the 12 by 12 inch rub-on that we got. This way I was able to pair a larger word with a smaller phrase and make a title that worked for my layout. This is where I tuck the lace border behind the dark blue pattern paper. I can kind of see why I did that. I didn't want the line going along the two pattern papers to be too prominent because I, of course, wanted my cluster to draw the most attention on the layout. I moved the notebook binding die cut to between two of the layers. Then I extended that scalloped border a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right on the bottom of the cluster. So far, this layout has no photo, but don't worry, I'm going to add one in a little while. I have a smooth white piece of cardstock that measures 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. I'm inking the edges of it with some Stormy Sky Distress Oxide. I have my 4 by 4 inch photo on a white mat, and then I attach all those layers together. I wanted to give my photo just a little bit of dimension. To pop it up, I'm using an old piece of chipboard packaging. This was a perfect thickness, I thought, to pop it up a little bit but not add too much dimension to the photo. I used ATG adhesive to attach the chipboard down to the photo, and then I again applied some ATG adhesive onto the chipboard and attached that down to the layout. Now I'm going to start working on the flower clusters. I'm going to have one dark blue flower and a off-white flower in each of the clusters. I add in a lot of those die cut leaves that were in the kit. And then I also end up adding a number of smaller accent flowers to both of those clusters. In a recent video, I was talking about how I take quite a while to settle on the arrangement for the clusters on my layouts. They probably come together much easier for some people, but for me, I have to keep kind of toying around with the placement, sometimes even moving something the smallest bit, I think, can have a big impact on how the cluster looks. So I do go back to the clusters several times to rearrange the elements. I wanted to add something to the title cluster, and I absolutely love butterflies. So I added a rather long, thin butterfly to the top of the title. I thought that fit really well in that spot. I inked the edges with the Distress ink and Vintage Photo, along with a couple of other embellishments that I decided I wanted to add to the layout. I'm using an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch that I love, and I'm adding some dark blue photo corners. This is the same pattern paper I used on the left-hand side of the layout. If you've been with me for a while, you probably know that this is a photo of both of my daughters. I think 98% of my photos include one or both of them. And this photo was taken in 2017 when we went to Cape Cod, a place that we love to go for vacation. I remember that we were trying to find a place that we all wanted to eat dinner, and we finally decided on the restaurant that's behind my daughters in this picture. This photo was taken about 6 years ago. For some reason, it seems like much longer. Usually it's the opposite. I usually look at photos and think, oh, that just happened. But for some reason, it seems like they were so much younger in this picture. I'm adding some Finnabair heavy white gesso with an old bristle brush just to the edges of the flowers. The 49 and Market flowers already have a nice amount of variation in color, but I think that this adds a nice highlight and makes the flowers look even a little bit more dimensional. While I add most of the paint to the edges of the petals, I do add a little bit to the surface of the flower. I try to be very conservative about adding the white gesso to the flowers. I don't want to overdo it. I think it helps that I'm using a dry brush that helps me to be able to control the gesso a little bit better. I use some gel medium and I add a small flower to the center of the butterfly. Then I use the gel medium to attach down a couple more small flowers to the bottom right-hand cluster. I love adding pearls to my layouts, and I always like to add something to the photo corners to embellish them a little bit. So I'm using some self-adhesive pearls that I had in my stash. Now I'm using some pieces of cardstock, and I'm covering up my photo, and now I'm going to add some more white splatters. I already added some white splatters to the background, but I wanted to add just a couple to the flowers and the areas where I have the layered embellishments. And even though I tried to be so careful to cover up my photo, I am looking at the layout right now and I noticed that I got 2 little spots of white paint on it, but they're so small that they're not really too noticeable. Once the white paint dried, I added a few more touches, a small leaf to the bottom cluster. I also added a scrap of the lace border strip that I used earlier to the top of the photo, although I flipped it over so you could see the dark blue other side of it. Then I added a few more tan leaves in 2 different sizes to both of the clusters. I think just those few little leaves really help to fill out the clusters. I used a die that was in my stash and some of the packaging that was in the kit, and I die cut a whole bunch of branches to tuck into the clusters that are on this layout. The packaging that I die cut these branches from was shiny, and I really like the way that shininess looks on these small branches. The dies that I used, those are to the left of my mat. I bought these years and years ago, probably on eBay when I was first collecting dies. It's funny how I have dies that I've only used once, and some of them I haven't used yet at all, yet these dies have been used so many times, and I absolutely love them. I recently found a similar die by Creative Expressions called Berry Branches that I think is fairly similar to these dies, but I've never found anything just like them. I'm always afraid I'm going to misplace these dies and not be able to find them when I need them, because that's happened a couple of times. So now I keep them in their own folder with a couple of other dies that I use all the time. That way I have them right in the front of where I store my dies, and I know that they're always kept there. I'm adding 3 more butterflies to the layout. I didn't want the one up in the title to be all by itself, so I picked 2 front-facing butterflies. I popped up their wings on some foam and added some adhesive to the back and then pressed down on the center to make the wings pop up. I also added a side-facing butterfly to the white flower on the bottom cluster. I didn't pop up that butterfly, I just attached it directly down to the flower. I have my gel glue ready to go, and I'm attaching down those die cuts that I placed on the layout a little bit earlier. I'm mainly attaching them down underneath where they connect to the clusters. That way they won't be glued flat down to the page, but they will be attached so that they don't come loose. I add a few more pearls to the layout. I add some very small single pearls to the bumps in all of the scalloped trim. Now I'm using some strips of 3mm pearls. These have some adhesive on them already, and I'm adding these to the 2 butterflies that are front facing in each of the 2 large floral clusters. I was thinking that the dark blue of that lace strip looked a little too dark for that area. I thought it might look better if I flipped it over, and I did really like the light blue better. So this layout is complete. Here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed watching it. I hope that you're enjoying some of these older videos that I'm finally posting on my channel. There will be several more of them coming soon. In the description box, you can find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website where you can check out all of the kits that My Creative Scrapbook has to offer. And if you would like to purchase a subscription, you can do so on the website. Don't forget to check out the My Creative Scrapbook Instagram account. The links to all of their social media are also in the description box. And if you like, you could check out my Instagram account, which is @CityScrapper. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.